Welcome to another episode, and we're going to continue on with Genesis verse by verse. But if you haven't watched my introduction video to this series, I would appreciate it and I would recommend you do it because it's going to help you think about some things that are important as you go through this Bible study. Today we're going to look at Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, I might rock your world with what I'm about to say, but you will survive. I did. I know that in the past, the way I believed about Genesis, if someone started contradicting that, saying there was evidence against it, I sometimes I just shut the whatever I was listening to off because I didn't want to hear it, because I didn't want to be my world to be shaken. But sometimes that has to happen. There are many religious beliefs that I wonder why people believe them. And I look back at my early Christian years and I realize I could have been guilty of that. But fortunately, I believe what I was being taught was right. But had I been in being taught wrong stuff, then I could have been guilty of that because I wasn't thinking for myself. I came to a place where truth was more important than religion, and I believe the Bible is true. So I had no fear of going where truth would lead me. Now, think about this for a moment. If God is eternal, then he existed long before the universe did. We have no idea what God has done in eternity past, but we must assume he wasn't idle. That's not like the character of God. And I think that this is something we must meditate on before we start assuming things and making assumptions about the creation story. Think about that for a minute. Just ponder that. You're not going to be able to answer that question, but it exposes you to something so grand that it's hard to wrap our mind around. What has God done for eternity past? And he didn't start to exist when the universe did. He was existing long before that. It will humble us to realize that we are only a blip in eternity and we should not think we can understand everything. Now, one question I had about the first chapter of Genesis was, how could the stars be so far away and yet the universe be only 10,000 years? Now, I say 10,000 years because that seems to be the oldest that young earth creationists would accept, is what I was taught, young earth creationism. So the max that this creation story could go back to is 10,000 years. And that's why I say that. But knowing about the stars seemed to indicate that the universe was old. How could I reconcile that? I felt I couldn't really question the universe's age because of the company I kept, because of the churches I was with. If you did ask that question, the typical answer was God created things with age. But that didn't always sit right, and I don't know why. But I tried to come to some comforting realization about it, and I turned to the Answers in Genesis website and I read this about starlight. Now, listen to this. This is very important. This is what helped me out tremendously. What it said was, in the past, some creationists thought that God may have simply created the light beams themselves. In other words, when we look at a distant galaxy, we are not actually seeing light that came from the galaxy, but rather a picture of the galaxy that God placed in the beam of light at creation. This view also means that anything we see happening in the distant space, such as an exploding star, never actually happened. Celestial events would simply be fictional movies created by God. But this doesn't seem consistent with the creator of the character with the character of God as described in the Bible, and they reference 1 Corinthians 14:33. Even more significantly, this view seems to clash with what the Bible itself says about the stars. In Genesis 1:15 teaches us that God made the lights in the heavens to give light upon the earth. But if God created the light in transit, then the light doesn't actually come from the stars. This would mean that more than 99% of the universe is not yet fulfilling its God ordained purpose to give light upon the earth. And I will put a reference of this in the description, this article. Now, some people have had, that I've tried to explain this to, have had a difficult time understanding it. Then I listened to a audio book on Genesis, and they use this illustration, and I think it's helped out a lot because the people I've told it to, they seem to understand it. When we look at the sun, we see light which is 8 minutes old. That means that if we observe a solar eclipse or we turn our telescope towards the sun and see a solar flare, these things happened 8 minutes in the past. If we see light from our nearest star, the nearest star to our sun, which is Proxima Centauri, we see light that is 4.2 light years away, or 4.2 years old. If we move close to the edge of our Milky Way galaxy, the stars we see will be more than 100,000 light years away, or the light is 100,000 years old. Even if astronomers were off in their calculations, not even Christian astronomers would say that stars are only 10,000 light years away. We are saying that stars are hundreds of thousands or millions of light years away, so our universe has to be that old. Everything we see is a story of light. If you're watching this, you are seeing light coming at you, and it's telling you a story. Sorry about that. So, here's something I had to come to, and I hope that you will come to. With this understanding, I had to believe that the universe is old. Denying this to me was like saying the earth was flat because I believed that the Bible taught it was flat. And you could maybe try to make that case from the Bible, but it doesn't fit with reality, so it's wrong. And I think that you could try to make the case that the universe is young because you think that's what the Bible teaches, but it's wrong. Both of these things are irrefutable, that the earth is round and that the universe is old, so we must accept them. And that doesn't mean the Bible's incorrect. What it means is our understanding of what it's teaching is not correct. And I could say a lot more about this. And we probably will get into that as we go into the Bible study. But if we're unwilling to accept things because we have an interpretation that conflicts with it, we cannot be trusted to be truthful. And I want to be truthful. I do not want to have a bias, a prejudice that keeps me from finding the truth. So at this point, many might think that I am suggesting that evolution is true. No, no, no. If you are thinking that, then you have boxed yourself in where Satan wants you to be, because there are many, many other ways of looking at this. It's not this either or, that the universe has to be young, or if it's old, then evolution is true. That is just a very shallow and limited way of viewing things. But let me say, as far as the Big Bang, we should be willing to accept that, because the Big Bang talks about the universe having a beginning. And from my understanding, many of the astronomers who first discovered the Big Bang, who were atheistic-minded scientists, didn't want to accept it because it seemed to make the Bible true. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The second part about the Big Bang is what's called the fine-tuning of the universe argument. And secular scientists, astronomers, figured this out, that if any of the parameters like gravity and other things were off even to the nth degree, and you can look this up and study this for yourself, the universe would have not existed. And so some consider it one of the best arguments for a creator. So why should we reject the Big Bang? Here is the thing. If you accept the universe is old, then you're going to have a problem with the sun, moon, and stars being created on day 4. And that puzzled me. How could that work? And, I had that question at first, but I did not assume the Bible was wrong. What I assumed was, well, maybe I'm misunderstanding something here. And that's something we're going to have to work through as we go through this Bible study. But what I want to leave with is probably the two most important things we can get from this verse. One, we learn that our universe is not an accident, but a purposeful system from the mind of a creator. And that is so fundamentally important for people to understand. You have to understand that God created this with a purpose. Therefore, our lives are purposeful. We are not just going through the motions without no meaning to our lives. The second one, which is just as powerful, if not more, is the greatest miracle ever is our universe. You either believe the universe came from nothing or it came from God. And in my mind, both of those constitute a miracle. You say, that's not a miracle. Well, whatever you want to define a miracle, but something coming from nothing, that's a miracle as far as I'm concerned. And if that miracle exists, I mean, which it does, there's a universe that seemed to exist from what? And who made it? But there's a universe, and we have a planet with life upon it. That constitutes a miracle. So therefore, any miracles we read about in the Bible should be easily to be accepted, because the greatest universe at all is that something exists. And how, if Jesus was raised from the dead, then God took something that what existed and rejuvenated it. That's far less than a miracle of taking nothing and making something. So those two things are very important for us to keep in mind as we read the very first verse of Genesis. So let's work on getting through Genesis together as we continue reading this awesome story of how our world began. Hey, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel and give a thumbs up if you liked what I'm saying here. And then also click on that notification bell so when I make my next video on this series, you'll be able to watch it. God loves you. I do too. Have a great day. Bye.